I will drop right here the code of conduct that we use. So this is a friendly and professional space, and so we use the R Consortium's code of conduct. So Andrew and I will be moderating. We're really glad that you're here and happy to create a environment for. Oh, I think I might have a window open that has a no, not me. Okay.
Sorry, that was me.
Okay. I'm like, oh no, I have a window open that has my voice
So
going,
we are
but
live streaming now, and it popped up, and
yeah, no problem at all. No problem at all. Thank you so much, Andrew, for all that you do here. Um, great. So this month we are so happy to have Mark here with us. So Mark works at Microsoft as a cloud architect and data scientist, and works with Microsoft's customers on their data science, machine learning, and advanced analytics problem. It focuses a lot on Azure, which is really exciting. So Mark, I know you are a longtime R user and teacher. You yourself have been involved in meetups, our meetups as well. So it's really exciting to have you here. So thank you so much for preparing and for talking to us today about Visual Studio Code and Azure Machine Learning.
Thank you for the invitation. Really happy to be here. Yes, I did organize the R group here in the DC area for a long time. And then, around the R meetup, we started Data Community DC, which was basically a whole slew of different meetup groups. So there's Data Science DC, Statistical Programming DC, which is what we renamed the R group after what Drew Conway had done in New York. He renamed the New York R group, I think, Open Statistical Programming. And we're like, all right, well, let's just follow suit. Haven't really been active locally just because life gets in the way between work and teaching and other things. But no, happy. Thank you for having me. I love talking about this, and I love being part of the R community. I usually go to Jared's conference when I can. Also help them do the one here in DC, the R-Gov one. So anyway, happy to be here. So thanks for having me. All right, folks. Well, welcome. As Julia said, so my name is Mark. I work at Microsoft. I've been at Microsoft for about 5.5 years. I'm a cloud architect. That means that I work with customers, helping them do all sorts of stuff, cool stuff on Azure. Used to work with federal customers. Now I work with customers in financial services. And for 6 months, from last July through December, I had the opportunity to do a 6 rotation in the Azure Machine Learning product team. So I got to really learn a lot about the platform itself, sort of what happens behind the scenes, and as part of that, I undertook the challenge, I guess, to update our R documents because they weren't that great to begin with. So ended up preparing a whole end-to-end workflow with R on Azure Machine Learning, which is really kind of where this talk came about. So I'm going to show you, so today what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to set up Visual Studio Code locally, right on your workstation if you don't have it set up already to work with R. And then I'll talk about the end-to-end example with, to the extent that we can, time permitting, probably spend about 45 minutes on this topic, maybe up to an hour, depends, we'll see. If you have any questions, feel free to chime in and ask them. I think Julia is manning the chat, so if I don't see the question, just let me know. But again, really make this interactive as possible. If you have questions about anything that I'm talking about, please feel free. So I'll start by saying, I'm guessing, right, that most of us are RStudio users, and to some degree, and I have been an RStudio user myself for a long time. So, it is a little bit of a different experience. I'll say that by using it. Just, at the end of the day, Visual Studio Code is a different IDE. And some people are using, and I mean, definitely like I said, RStudio, I've been using it for years. I still use it. Sometimes you definitely want to use Visual Studio Code because for whatever reason, right? Whether you're working with multiple languages at the same time, or, if you want to use it, for example, for Azure Machine Learning because of all the different plugins that it has. So, it's a different tool. So what I'm going to try to show you today is, given that most of us probably are used to the RStudio experience in Visual Studio using R, I'm going to try to show you how to replicate that as much as possible with Visual Studio Code. All right. So let me share my screen. Actually, wrong button. Come on, where's my controls? Oh, here we go, share screen. Okay, so we're going to start out. Can you see my screen?
Yes, sure can. Looks
Okay,
good.
perfect. So what I'm sharing now is I'm actually sharing my local VS Code screen. So in order to make our work with Visual Studio Code, you have to do a couple of things. I don't have slides, so I'm gonna talk through things. I'm creating a repo with README files and some of the settings JSON and key binding JSONs that I'm just gonna show you, and then I'll make that public. But I just didn't have a chance to get that done beforehand. So so first things first, you need to have Visual Studio Code installed on your local machine, and you need to have R installed on your local machine. If you have RStudio installed, doesn't matter because they're independent, right? So the first thing is in your R session. So I'm going to go here. So this is Visual Studio Code. I'm going to open up a terminal. Okay, I'm just going to basically run. So I'm running this on a Mac. And yes, I work for Microsoft, and yes, I use a Mac because we support everything these days. It's all open source. We're very pro open source. Let me get rid of these two. Okay, so I have here my my repo, and the first things first is obviously this is my local R session. So there are two libraries that you need to install to make this work. Obviously, I have a bunch of libraries installed in my base environment. So the two libraries that you will need to install in your R environment. Now, if you are an R end user or any sort of other type of virtual environment type user, these packages need to be installed in the base environment, right? It's kind of like what's in the path, because that's what language. So my understanding is that the way Visual Studio Code interfaces with R is through a project called Language Server, and this is the language server adapted for R. There's language server for different languages, and I believe most of the different implementations of different languages use the same engine. But the R package called Language Server, which is over here, right here. Where's it? Language Server. And you need to so this you need to have this installed. And the other thing, this is more of a recommendation. You have to install, well, you don't have to, but I recommend installing this HTTP GD package. HTTP GD, what it does is it allows you to serve the plot window as a SVG type window, and it's obviously it's scalable, and it's also web-based, and I'll show you that. That's actually really cool, and this works really well, especially when you're using R on a remote machine. Okay, so that's kind of step number one, right? So as you see, I already have these installed. Then the other thing you need to do, let me quit here. Let me just quit here. No, quit save workspace image. No. There we go. I'm just going to close this terminal window here. The other thing you need to do is in VS Code, go to the extensions, and you have to install this extension, the one that's called, there's a couple of them that have been, there used to be an older version of this extension. It used to be called something else. So maybe if you have an older version, you might want to remove it. But the current version of this is called the R extension for Visual Studio Code. If you search for it, and you see it's got about 1 million downloads. And then here, when you look at this, it points to the GitHub repo page that has the code for this. So with these two things,
can I ask you a question about this? How do I know who made an extension? Like, where do I see that?
It's here. Typically, there's the
Okay.
name of the. So you see here it says R. That's really the name. Actually, it used to be called R language server. Now it's just called R. As you see here, it's called the R logo, but the publisher is usually below the name.
Okay. Okay.
You see,
See,
so this is the extension name. It's actually called R. I mean, the extension is called R, but the name of it is, or the way to refer to it, the way people, at least I refer to it, is the R extension for Visual Studio Code. But the publishers down here, if I click on any of these other extensions, right, you'll see the name of the extension up here. You can see my mouse pointer, right?
Yeah, sure can.
And then, yeah, you see the publishers is right the person beneath it. So to the R extension, it's called the R extension, and the publisher is called R editor support. Okay, so this is the extension that you want to use. I don't know if you search for them, you may see some of the other extensions, like some of the older extensions. So there's a couple of them if you search for R. I don't have R debugger installed. You can. I'm not going to talk about that today. This one has been around for a while, R tools. I don't know if that one actually interacts with the R extension. Now, Microsoft is not the publisher of the R extension.
Yeah,
It's
that's kind of
really,
what I was asking about.
yeah, no, this is not a Microsoft extension. This was actually created. So if you click here, let's see if we go to, if I click here, sorry, there is a repo. I'll get to that in a second. Let me get through this here.
Great.
So
Yeah, sure.
anyway, just let me finish this step. So you have to install this. Once you install this, and if you click here when you click on the extension, it gives you the extension sort of metadata page. One thing I definitely recommend is there is a getting started guide over here, which is kind of what I'm talking about step by step. I'm not going through this in the exact same order. But as you see, right, you do need the language server. So if you click on the wiki, it'll take you to a web browser, and I have that open on another tab to do that. So let's see here, and it just talks about the feature. So what this extension, and actually there's a Ken Run is one of the authors of this extension. He spoke at Jared's meetup a few months ago, maybe like sometime in 2022. I think that's on YouTube somewhere. And he has a blog post he's got several blog posts about this. So again, this is not a Microsoft extension by any means, but Ken Run and a couple other people have contributed to this. And I think it's great. I think they really did a good job, out of the box. Can it be tweaked and can it be improved? Absolutely. I hope to see some improvements. I'll talk about what I would wish to see in this at some point. Because it's open source, I think anyone can actually contribute to it. So anyway, what it does is it gives you the ability to interact with the R, with the R console. It does syntax highlighting. It does some code completion. You can actually look at it has a workspace viewer, so you can actually see a data frame in like tabular format. And then you can do other things like debugging and that sort of thing. But I'm not going to get into that today. Okay, so these are the capabilities that this provides. So once you have this installed, this is what's going to happen, right? I'm going to go here. I have let me close this. So I have just a pretty simple script in R code. Okay. And then, what I do is I go here, and as you see, there's nothing else right now in my VS Code. I just have a script, right? I have no running windows. Typically, if you have a terminal, it's like down here at the bottom, depending on how you have it set up. But here's the thing. I'm going to select library ggplot2, and then this is a Mac, so I'm going to press Command Enter. I don't know what the Windows command. It's kind of like this one's different than RStudio. I always keep these mix these in my head. I think in RStudio is Control Enter. Here it's Command Enter, and I may be completely mistaken, but I'm not sure. So I'm going to click Command Enter, and as you see, right, I have an R interactive session. I got opened down here, and as you see here now, this command was actually sent down here to the session, right? So here at the top, I have my code editor, right, my script, and then at the bottom I have my R console. Okay, so this is what that's what this does, and then I can click. I'm just going to do a ggplot over here really quickly. So So here is something that I did here, and I want to show you something. I want to show you something different. So as you see, another pane opens up, which provides the plot view. Now, because I'm using HTTP GD, you can actually, you see what if I click here, it says open an external browser. If I click on this, now I'm actually going to switch to the browser. Give me 1 second. New share, come on. Where's my share? Let me switch over to the browser. So as you see here now in the browser, I have it basically creates a local web server. And then here's my plot. And if you have multiple plots, I'm going to actually run the code again. It's the same plot, but I'm just going to run it again so that you can see what actually happens. No, run. So now I have a second plot. Again, it's the same plot, but if you have a whole series of plots, you can actually navigate through the plots by looking at it over here. I don't know why it's not rendering. It should render. Let's see, plot number 1. There we go. Plot 1, plot 2. This is some thumbnail hasn't done that. This is possible because of that extension that I told you, HTTP GD. If you don't install this extension, what you're going to end up happening, if I go back to RStudio, I'm sorry, if I go back to VS Code, you can see how I'm a fan of of all of these. Get them mixed up in my head. But let's see here. New share. Let me go back to VS Code. What happens when I go back to VS Code is this panel up here on the right. You would see this would be it would be a PNG as opposed to an SVG, and it would look much smaller. You can't really scale it. So the at HTTP GD, I think, you know, again, I'm not sure who wrote that. That's just an R package, but it gives you this capability, which I find it extremely, extremely useful. Again, especially if you're doing something in a remote environment, which is what we're going to be showing in a short little while. So that's what gets you out of the gate. Now, a couple other things that you want to do to make your experience better. There's a couple of, so I'll share this later. I'll put this in a repo and share this. But what you want to do is in Visual Studio Code, you want to go to up here to the command or open the command palette. On a Mac, it's Command-Shift-P. And then you want to open where it says here, open user settings. So this is a JSON file, right? So Visual Studio Code is highly customizable. And right now I'm only showing you, I mean, I had like 24 extensions. I removed them just so that I could show you a clean slate. But typically I have a lot more things here in my user settings. It's really extensible. It's really customizable. I mean, we could spend a whole like day talking about Visual Studio Code and all the things you can do with it. But as it relates to R, there's a couple of things that you definitely want to do, right? So even though if you do install HTTP GD package, you still have to tell the extension to render using that package. So you do have to add this r.plot.use HTTP GD, set that setting to true. If you don't do that, even if you have HTTP GD, this will not work. And then the other thing, so here's just let me give you a couple of things. At the top, these are just some settings that I have for myself, just kind of the I zoomed in right now to make this more legible, but I use I use a specific set of font and a specific size. The other thing I added here, which is not default setting, is the font ligatures. So for fonts that actually have ligatures like Fira code for code, it's really, really cool. And if you don't know what a ligature is, I'll show you. So you know how, so you see that, right? The assignment operator in R, you see how it's continuous, right? It actually looks like an arrow and not like two different characters. Same thing with the pipe character down here. It looks like an actual triangle as opposed to the pipe and the greater than sign. That happens because of ligatures. Not all fonts have ligatures, but most modern fonts do have them. And that just makes it much easier to read. And this is something that you can do on any text editor that supports, on any text editor where you can use fonts with ligatures. So back to the settings thing. The other things that I have here is, this is specifically related to the art editor. So as I'm typing, it should format my code. I'm not sure what the format engine it's using under the hood. I've tried this one, this art editor support.r, which is built into the extension. There's another one you can try. I think it's called Styler, which is also related to an R package. There's also linter, which is just an R linter. So this is something that you could play with, but what this gives you here, these two settings, and this is not written by default. After you install the extension, some of these things may, in your user settings, you might see some of these things change, but what I would recommend is just go to the JSON, because the other thing you can do is for user settings, I should close here. I could do preference. You see, I could do either user settings JSON, or I could do preferences open user settings. If I do this one, what this opens, it opens up like the entire set of user settings in sort of a list format. But the JSON one is really more of the kind of like a custom settings. And obviously you can edit this just as like you would any text file. The other thing you may want to do is, and I had this before I removed everything, our session watcher. It just tells the R console, or I think it tells the R extension to be looking for either a running R session, and if you don't find a running R session, starts a new one. Because what happens, right? Like right now I'm attached to this session over here. And if I run the code, again, it's going to send it to the previous running session I was. You can have multiple R sessions running together. I don't really know. I think Ken in one of his blog posts talks about how to set that up ideally. But again, I mean, most people are, I don't say most, but typically you'll have one single R session running. If you need to run multiple R sessions at a given point in time and still work off of the same script, that can be a little bit more confusing to use.
Related to that, we do have a question of someone
Yes.
who uses VS Code with Python and is used to, like, when you open a project, having a virtual environment. Are you going to get into any of that at all today? Like, would you use RN
No,
for
no, but
that, or
I wasn't planning on it, but I'm happy
okay,
to talk about it.
maybe,
And
yeah,
I
maybe
would have
briefly.
to, so what you would do, right? You have to the way to manage that is I have begun using REnv as my R environment manager. I have Conda running on my machine right now for Python. I don't use R through Conda. I create a separate
No,
R.
don't do it.
Yeah,
It's
don't do that.
don't do it.
Okay, don't do that. It's no. As much as the Conda and Anaconda team really wanted to make this, easy to use, it causes all sorts of problems. So
Yes.
the easiest thing to do is to have your Python be Python and your R be R. And if you need to use Python through R with Reticulate, then you can use the appropriate one. But what I typically do, right, and I've gotten more in the habit of doing this, is on my local machine, right, I basically have a kind of a base environment, right, a base R environment, which it has a bunch of libraries. Like I said, you need HTTP, you need language server, you need HTTP GD. I have the tidyverse here because obviously that's like one of the packages I use all the time. So the ones, like the packages that I use the most, I have them in my base R environment. And as well, I do have the REnv. Where is it? Did I install it? Oh, maybe not, because I started again. I started from scratch. Here it is. I do have it. So I do have REnv. And then what I normally do is in my project. So unlike RStudio, Visual Studio Code doesn't really have a project like wrapper. So the way to think about it is basically anything within a subdirectory is your project, but there is no naming, there is no such thing where you're actually defining this as a project. So what I would do, right, is I would go here and I would say like file, let's see, let's create a new folder. Let's see, open folder. Let's create a new folder over here. So demo, or let's see, project demo. Can you see my pop-ups or just the
Just went gray. I don't see a pop-up,
Okay, all right,
unfortunately.
never mind. So what I did is I went to in Visual Studio Code, I went to file, the drop down, I said new, I think I said open folder, and I basically created a new project. I'm sorry, not a new project. I created a new folder. So when Visual Studio Code switches to that new folder, as you see over here, right, in my browser, there's nothing in there. So here's project demo, and there's nothing in there because there are no files. So what I would do is, in this case, I actually have, and I'll show you on my local machine. This is probably not best practice, but I was using this for class this last semester, and because we were using all sorts of different packages, we created actually an REnv file that we shared with the students so that everyone would have exactly the same packages, regardless of whether they were on Mac or on Windows or on Linux. So I have this directory called cd-environment, which is just a directory I created, which has my REnv lock file with the specification. It also has a conda YAML file and that sort of thing. So if I wanted to use the packages over here, what I would do is in my R code, let's see, let me just do a new file, new document. I would say, I would have to do REnv : load. Sorry. And I can't type at the same time that I'm actually speaking. So now any package that I load will come from that environment. Ideally, what you would do is you would create an REnv within the subdirectory. Like you would initiate an R environment in the same subdirectory where your project is. And then next time I load R, it should if it finds the RN file in, there's a special set of files that have to be in your directory. If it does that, it should revert to those sets of packages. So that's what I have been doing. And this is not necessarily specific to Visual Studio Code, but that's how I'm actually managing it. Again, unlike RStudio, which has this idea of, you know, the .rproj and the project file, and it's self-contained, but that's managed by the editor itself, right? By the IDE itself. Does that answer your question? Awesome.
Yep. Yeah, they say yes.
Okay, so let me go back to, let me go back to the other one. Open folder. Okay, so back to this. Let me, back to these settings that I was talking about. The other thing is this one here, our term options. So when this actually provides the extension what parameters to pass to our console when it starts. So this is what I found. As you see right now, I have here like no save, no restore history, no site file, quiet. So all of these parameters, what it does is when I start a new R session, which I can do, right? Let me actually close this one here. So if I'm here and I'm in my code and I start a new R session, right? As you see, I don't have one. I can either select the code, right? And then hit Command Enter. So as you see here, wait, history restored. It shouldn't have, because I gave it, there's this no restore history parameter, but I don't know why that is not working. But anyway, it should work, but it's quiet, right? You don't get all of the startup messages. It just basically starts it up and it works really well. It shouldn't save your history. It shouldn't try to restore any what is it? The .r something file that sometimes you have, like not at the environment, but like when you save, like you save your working session. So, and that's probably the best practice. And I got some of this, I think, kind of from reading multiple things. I've tried multiple things, and this works fine. It works fine for me. Hopefully you won't have that. You won't have any other issues. The other one thing that I want to talk about, and is there is another R CLI called Radian. Interestingly, Radian is a Python package.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, exactly. But what I have found is the cool thing about Radian, and I will provide a link to that project, is it's kind of like, it's faster than the R console. It also gives you syntax highlighting here in the console itself. So it has a bunch of cool things. Now that I have installed already, but because that is a Python package, you have to install that in your Python environment, whether you're using Conda, whether you're using VN. So I have it installed in my base Conda environment, and I'll show you. Actually, let me just open a terminal. So if I do Conda, so Conda list, and here I have Radian. Again, in Python, I sort of do the same thing. I have a base Conda environment, which has the minimum necessary libraries that I'm going to use sort of across the board. So obviously it's got Jupyter and some of the associated project packages. It has Radian as well, because I want to use that in you know, for R particularly, and a bunch of other things. So Radian should be here. PQR. Oh, is it not here? Oh, you know what? I deleted it. So anyway, let's just do this. Let's just do Conda install. I deleted it because I wanted to show you that you need to install it in the base environment.
Ah, there you go. While that's installing, someone pasted in a particular error that they get, but in general, so maybe let's ask a higher level question about it. If
Sure.
you have problems getting R hooked up to VS Code, or you see errors when you try to launch an R terminal, what are some steps you use to debug? Or like, what are some sort of things, sort of common, you know, something's not quite right between how R and VS Code are talking to each other? What are some sort of first steps you take, or things you think of to check?
So, you know, part of it was actually defining this R term option here, you know, because I think some of the ones like the app path to shell executable. It was trial and error. I don't believe there's a good set of documentation available that lets you sort of debug the interface between the extension and the R session. So it was kind of trial and error. So kind of my wish list, I think, it would be nice to have some kind of debugger built in where you can actually see it, because I had problems in the past. Oh, actually, hold on. There was one setting here that I didn't that I removed. It was called inherit terminal environment. When I had that set to true, I was having problems, and then I had to set it to false, and I wasn't having problems, and then I changed something, and I don't think that was part of the problem. But unfortunately, I don't think there's an easy way, at least not yet. I hope that as the extension matures and maybe more people contribute to it, the documentation gets better, the wiki gets better, and it will give you some suggestions. Honestly, I don't have a good answer.
Okay, great.
Okay.
So so some of these questions that are like very specific about various errors, maybe we are going to get the, Mark, said you were going to share some of this on GitHub. We will definitely get that afterwards so that people can look at it, and we'll see. We can hopefully get folks on their way. Anyway,
Okay.
thanks so much, Mark. It looks like,
Sure.
yeah, that's done.
So what I'm going to do
Cool.
now is let me do something. So I'm going to show you Radian. Just make sure that the path is correct. So if I start Radian in the terminal, right, you'll see. There we go. So here you see, you have a different prompt. And then let's say I type library, and you see how it does syntax highlighting, and it does code completion and that sort of thing. So it's pretty cool. So I've been using R with Radian. It works great most of the time. So again, something that you might want to consider. But if you do that, there are a couple of things that you do need to change. So I'm going to change. I had these commented out. I do have to give it this R. Again, this is specifically for Mac. There's one for Windows. It's like r.rterm.windows, I believe, that you have to look at the documentation. So I have to give it the path where Radian is, which is this one here. And I do have to give it this one bracketed paste. And what this does is it's just the way when you do code selection in the text editor and hit Control-Enter to send the code to the console, it adds some additional metadata. And I think what this does is it helps translate that so that you don't get that. So I'm going to restart my R session. So let me save this right now. I'm going to restart my R session. And hopefully, right, it'll now start in Radian when I do this. Yeah, you see, it's really funky over here. So there we go. So it started. You now see the different prompt, right? This is something that I haven't been able to completely remove. I don't know. I think it has something to do with how Radian expects the chunk of code and how kind of what additional metadata. Again, kind of back to debugging. I don't know what the call is, so it's hard. It's really hard to debug in that sense. So that might be a question for Ken and the team that created the extension. So again, this is really basic, but so hold on before I move on. So the other thing you definitely want to do, you don't have to do this, but if you're coming from RStudio, like I have and been using RStudio for a long time, I have muscle memory in my fingers, and the shortcuts that I use the most are the pipe and the assignment operator. Those are pretty much the only ones that I could think of that I have muscle memory, and I still want to do that in any R session that I am anywhere. I still want to do, Command dash or Control dash, depending on the operating system, and Shift Command, Shift Control or Shift Command M for the pipe operator, right? So the thing that I did is I actually created a custom key binding file. Again, I found I think something on Stack Overflow. I should put the source if I remember where it was. So what this does is the only keyboard shortcut for the R extension that I know works out of the box is that Command Enter for sending code, for selecting the code and sending it to the console. Pretty much everything else, there's no other shortcuts like you're used to in RStudio. So what I created is I created this, Alt plus dash to do the assignment operator. So, you know, the syntax for key bindings is sort of a syntax of its own, because you have to give it the when, right? So here it says like when, you know, it says when editor language ID is R, RMD, QMD, and the focus is on the editor itself. So if I press, you know, Alt and dash, I do get the assignment operator with the spaces, right? You see it's got the space, assignment operator, and space. Same thing down here for the pipe operator. This is the native pipe now, not the Magritter pipe. Okay, so one caveat though is this only works, at least the way it's designed right now. I've been trying to figure out how to make this work in both the text editor and the console. Right now, this only works in the editor. So if I'm, you know, typing some sample code over here, you know, it's like, you know, my var, I could press, you know, alt dash, and I get my assignment operator, and then that, and then I press Control Enter A. No, not A. Let's say 1. Okay. And the other thing is, like, you know, I'm gonna do this one. I'm just gonna do the. Sorry, it's it's finger muscle memory. I screw up all the time. I'm gonna do df. I'm gonna say, you know, Tibble. You know, let's see, A equals 1 to 2, and then B equals 2. You know, 3 to 4. Again, I'm just creating a Tibble over here. Oh, of course, I need to do a library. Okay, now I'm going to do this. So in the R extension, this is actually pretty cool. If you go to the R, if you click on the R icon right now, you see here the namespace is the global environment. So if I click on my my data, so my var, it says number 1. So you actually get a what's the name of the panel in RStudio that shows you the variables? I forget, but you get that same type of functionality.
Environment is what it's
Environment,
called. Yeah.
thank you. So, but if I click here on the data frame, if I double click on it, actually, if I click here, I actually see it here in tabular format on in VS Code. So again, these are like really basic things, but hopefully it'll give you enough to get started. There's so much tweaking that that you can do, and I mean, ideally, I would want to see more of these things kind of built into maybe the default settings of the extension. But again, if you're coming from RStudio and you do need to use, you know, and you want to use Visual Studio Code, or you need to use Visual Studio Code for whatever reason, hopefully that transition will be easy, right? And again, you know, why I'm not trying to argue with one or the other, but it's just another tool. You might need to use Visual Studio Code because you have other extensions that you're using for something else. You're doing development in multi-code environment. You know, you've got all of the Azure extensions built into Visual Studio Code. So obviously, like, if you have everything in a single place, sometimes it's just easier to do that.
Yeah, so actually related to that, that was one of the biggest questions people asked real early. So while you're speaking about it, do you want to say maybe so you just addressed a couple things, multiple languages, wanting to use Azure resources. When do you find yourself like, oh, for sure I'm going to use VS Code here? Or when do you start like, oh, I'm just going to open up RStudio again? When you talk to your own customers, what are some of the things that lead people to choose different IDEs or make it a good fit?
I think part of it is just personal preference, right? I mean, there is a big component of personal preference over here, but there is another element of I just want to be. I don't want to be switching around tools. So again, the multi-language example, right? Like I'm working on a project where I have both R and Python code. You know, the more obviously, I've been at Microsoft now for several years. All of our SDKs, like, there are extensions that are built into Visual Studio Code that provide really easy connectivity to Azure and to do stuff on Azure, things like that. Again, Azure Machine Learning is one of them. There is actually an Azure Machine Learning extension too, which allows you to do a lot of things from the IDE and kind of execute that on the cloud. So for me, it makes a lot more sense to sort of work in this environment because of all of these other things that I have. And really, that's probably going to be the focus of the decision going forward for most people.
Yeah, for sure. There are a couple specific things as you were showing this. So So when people use our studio, they're maybe used to that that view that you did there,
Mhm.
and you're looking at it. Then if you were to change the data frame, the
Let's see.
actual like what's valued in DF, like yeah, in our studio, the view updates right then. It's like reactive. Is there any way
Uh,
to?
I don't think so. No,
Yeah.
I
Okay.
just changed it, and I just have to if I click on this again, now I get a new window. And
Okay.
so look,
Yeah.
it's
Sure.
not
Sure. Yeah.
it's not one-to-one. Like,
Yeah.
the basic functionality, yes, like being able to have a script editor and be able to send the code interactively, like you get that. But
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, like I said, like I've been a long-term RStudio user myself, and you get used to these sort of nice, like, awesome things that the IDE gives you. I wish I'd like to see more of that in this extension, but again, these are community contributed extensions.
Yeah.
As far as I know, I don't know. That's a good question. That's really something outside of my scope, but I wonder if maybe Microsoft is planning on publishing an extension to kind of like, but I don't have the answer to that.
Yeah. No, and this was for sure not like, criticism or anything, but just people were asking like, what about this that I'm used to doing? Is that something that
Yeah. So
has?
I've been using VS Code. I started using VS Code primarily a long time ago for Azure and Python. I don't like notebooks. Okay. And one of the things I'd have to install a bunch of packages, but there is this the Python package, the Python extent. Actually, let me do this here. Let me do this quickly. If I install the Python extension, the Microsoft one, I think it's this one. If I install the Python extension and I start a new Python, I don't have to create a cell. I can just write I could do interactive Python from a Python script using like kind of like a magic cell, like you would do in sometimes, Jupyter, there's like these magic cells. But if I create a new, so again, this is Python. I have a bunch of code. I have to do some configuration, but just to show you, right? I'm going to start a new, let's see, file, new file. I'm going to just do Python file. So here, a bit over here, I'm going to do, I do pound %%. And then this is, no, this is not the right extension, because what happens when I type in this, is it pound? I'm blanking here right now. I'm sorry. It should show like run cell. It basically has this idea of cells, but without it actually being cells. This is actually a py file. And when I click Command Enter, it runs it as a cell in a Jupyter environment. So the running does happen in Jupyter, but I still treat my code as a script as opposed to like a bunch of cells. So for me personally, like I started using VS Code because of that. And again, because now I do a lot more there and I still want to do more R stuff. Like for me, and obviously like part of this for me is like to show the broader community that you can do this. Again, just trying to get resources from here and there. And because I was doing some of the work and updating our documentation, right? It's like, okay, well, there's multiple ways to go about this. Visual Studio Code is one way.
Nice. We do typically like to let people out at the hour. It looks like we're about 10 minutes left. Do you want to
Okay.
talk more about how you set up VS Code or other extensions that you like, other things that you do? Or do you want to take 10 minutes to kind of talk about how you can go into Azure Machine Learning and use
So
that for
one of the cool things about the other cool thing, and this is kind of part of it, is the VS Code extension, like different packages, is with VS Code, you can do very easily, you can do remote coding. So via SSH. So for example, I do have I have a local server here at my kind of like data science box under the desk. And but also let me switch quickly to at least to talk about how to do remote computing on Azure Machine Learning on a compute instance within Azure Machine Learning, because that'll showcase the remote capability. And then, I won't really have time to go through the end-to-end example, but I will share that. And I do have
Perfect.
a repo. I do have some articles that I wrote and published earlier a couple months ago. And there's also a video. I talked about this on the AI show in Seth Forrest's AI show at Microsoft. And
Oh,
there's a
that's
link
so
to
cool.
YouTube.
Yeah, that sounds perfect.
Okay, so let me switch screens over here. So new share. Now let me switch over to my browser. Okay, so I'm going to go to my browser. And what I'm going to do here is, so this is Azure Machine Learning, right? I'm not really going to spend too much time explaining what Azure Machine Learning is, but in a nutshell, it is our managed machine learning platform for end-to-end custom machine learning, right? Now, there is work to integrate some of this, obviously with OpenAI. There's Hugging Face integrations, all sorts of things. But the one cool thing, especially if you're starting to you're starting to do some more cloud stuff, you basically need a bigger machine for something. The one cool thing is so this is the studio. This is what we call Azure Machine Learning Studio. Everything is here. So, but the one thing I'll talk about is this compute. So right now, these are virtual machines. Hold on, I lost people's video. Let me grab it 1 second. There we go. This is why I like using OBS, because then I don't lose the windows every time I switch.
There are so many.
What? I know. I mean, I have a 38-inch monitor with 15 windows open at once. So here I'm going to show you like how VS Code works when doing remote computing. So right now I started a new compute instance over here. And like you do that, like you do locally, the one thing you do have to do is actually install the language server package. So in the repo that I created, there is a shell script that does that for you, because you have to do that as sudo, because you do have to install language server. Because what happens with these compute instances right out of the box is, as you see here, there's Jupyter Lab, there's VS Code Desktop. When I click on this, what that's going to do is it's going to create an SSH connection between my local VS Code, and it's actually running VS Code on the server. So it's going to install the server extension for VS Code, which is running on that remote machine. But then the front end still resides here. So essentially, it's rather than having an SSH terminal window, you basically get all the greatness of the IDE, but you're actually doing remote computing. And that's actually pretty awesome. And you can do that, with any code, any sort of type of script or whatever. For R specifically, what you have to do is, and if you look at the video that I recorded with Seth, I go into a lot more detail here, but I'll give you like the two minute spiel. So you do have to install the libraries. And what I did here is I started a new machine before the meetup, and then I ran I basically, where is it here, bash VS Code setup interactive. So what it did is actually installed language server. There's a bunch of other things and language server and HTTP/GD. There's a bunch of stuff that gets install, other packages, other dependencies that get installed when you install language server. So don't be surprised, even on your local workstation. And then now that this is installed, I can go here to compute, and then I click here on VS Code. And what this is going to do, it's now going to, here, let me switch screens because I want to show you what's happening locally. So you're going to get this, basically this pop-up. If you don't have VS Code open, it's going to attempt to open VS Code. And then you're going to get this pop-up that says the Azure Machine Learning is not installed. The extension is not installed. Would you like to install it? So you have to install the Azure Machine Learning extension. And then, let's see, one more thing. Let me switch screens again. Zoom, share. Hold on, let me go through this first. And here, okay, this is share screen. No, that's not the one. I'm sorry. Code here. Now, share. So now what's happening, right? This is actually a new VS Code window that opened up on my local machine, right? And as you see over here on the bottom left, it says opening remote, and it says it's installing Azure ML WebSocket. So this is specifically for this remote machine on Azure Machine Learning. And then it says, do you trust the authors of the files in this folder? Yes. So now what's happening, so first things first is I need to install on that remote machine the R packages first. And then the first time you do this, this is only going to happen the first time you do this. Every additional time you do this, this will not, you won't be asked to install the Azure ML extension, but you will also have to install the R extension in this remote session, and I'll show you how to do that. So let's see here. Updated VS Code. And like when I go navigate the file browser, this is actually seeing my file browser that's associated in my remote compute environment over there. But if I open up an interactive R session here, it says here, do you want to install the recommended R extension from our editor? So again, why are you being asked to do that? Because it essentially treats it as two different environments. And you can see I'm connected to a remote machine, as you see here down here, because it says Azure ML and the name of the compute instance. So unfortunately, I won't have much more time to spend on this, but what I'll do is I'll share the links to the repo. And then, the first thing is, how do you do interactive computing on Azure with R on Azure Machine Learning? Because it's specifically about R. And then I have a whole end-to-end example, which is, okay, how do I do interactive compute? Then how do I take my script, my interactive script, and turn it into a script that will run as a job in production or as an Azure Machine Learning job? Because even though it's called Azure Machine Learning, the scripts that you can run are pretty much anything, right? With our YAML, with our CLI v2, it's all YAML based. So you can provide any sort of executable, right? You just have to learn how to parameterize your scripts and create your Docker container where it's going to run. So I go through that whole example, all using R. I mean, all the code is R. And then how do you execute that using the Azure Machine Learning CLI v2, which is all YAML based.
Awesome. I think there are people are going to be interested to see that because they have definitely.
Well, I could do a follow-up session if you want to know.
Yeah.
That.
So, some of the questions that we didn't specifically get to were about features that people are used to in RStudio. If you are looking around for like an extension or how you might do it in some way, how do you go about finding extensions that might help you, or that give you things like, the viewer, or, you have kind of a specific workflow around plots, being able to see multiple plots. How do you find those kinds of resources and find the ones that are the best fit for you?
Well, a lot of what I found was really kind of looking at Ken Run's blog post, and he has a whole set of articles that he wrote that, how he sets up the environment. So I learned a little bit there. Some of it has been, I think, just searching the web and stuff. I don't think there's a really, we're professional
Yes.
searchers, right?
Right.
Or professional GPTers at this point. OpenAI. But yeah, that's is. I still think this is a fairly young ecosystem in the VS Code side of things for R particularly.
Yeah.
So I do hope to see more contribution and maybe more, set of resources. So one of the things that I will be doing soon in the next maybe week or two is also writing a blog post on our blog on Revolution blog, kind of summarizing a lot of what I talked about today. I'll see if I can find resources or links kind of to answer that question. I don't know off the top of my head, to be honest.
Yeah. And then I don't know if we want this one to be the last question, but another question is, if someone is like, what, I want to be in RStudio still for, the support of this kind of interactive data analysis, but I do need to use Azure. Do you deal with customers who are in that spot, or what kind of packages or tools do you recommend for people like that who do need to use Azure resources, but do it they want to work, like in RStudio itself?
So it is possible. There has to be some scaffolding done in order to make that fully integrated. So you can install RStudio as an application in a container running on these compute instances that I just showed you. What happens, the way it's set up right now, is it doesn't inherit all of the environment variables that it needs to be fully integrated. So it's not a great workflow, and that's why we don't really mention it very much. It used to be, actually, RStudio used to be part of those compute instances, but because of contractual obligations between Microsoft and Posit RStudio, that had to be removed. So yes, you can still bring your own RStudio, like you can still create a container, running either like open source RStudio or Workbench. But there have to be some additional scaffolding, and right now I don't even know exactly what needs to be done. But the short answer, it is possible. It just requires some more setup.
Yeah, yeah, nice. Nice. Well, this was super interesting. I am always really interested as someone who just likes thinking about people's workflows and the processes they use to get done what they're doing. I love learning about other ways that people work and seeing the other kind of tools that they use. And that is great to see. Do we have any other final questions that people either want to raise their hand and ask or type in before we wrap this up? All right. Well, I'm just going to say thank you again so much, Mark, for preparing this. If you want to, we'll get a link, and we'll put it on the we'll put the link onto the meetup page, so that
Okay.
folks can see that there. If we want, you can link to a repo that has that.
Sure. And then once I create my repo, I'll put a comment in the meetup page as well. So
Perfect.
the URL, and what it'll have the link to the settings JSON, the key bindings JSON, just kind of a short README, and
Mhm.
also links to the articles and the end-to-end example for the machine learning example. So like you have it all in a single place.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much. So thank you all
Thank
so
you.
much for coming. We got lots of thanks in the chat from people who enjoyed this. And for those of you who are interested, you can come next month, and we'll be hearing about some data visualization. Isabella, my coworker from Posit, is going to be here doing that. So that'll be lots of fun. And we hope that you all have a great rest of